Tell me about Monday.
So Monday, obviously a bit of context. I have been following Palestine Action for quite some time. I've obviously, it was front page news when they started spray painting RAF planes. But they've also been targeting Jewish businesses in Stamford Hill, across London, engaging in basically criminal damage across the country. So when we heard the news of the proscription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation, we thought this is like a great first step. But then we obviously heard that they were going to have a protest originally in Westminster, but then it was moved on to Trafalgar Square. And we saw, a lot of people on the far left, from people on the Vara media, people on Politics Joe, all these left-wing social media accounts promoting Palestine Action, almost supporting what they had done previously, despite their criminal activity, their lengthy list of criminal activities. And it was appalling, and I thought a lot of this stuff has gone completely unchallenged. Mm-hmm. Even if we're having the positive reinforcement from government, I don't know necessarily if we're having that from the media sphere of things.
And how long it took for the government to say anything was also...
Exactly.
It took a while.
About Palestine Action.
Palestine Action specifically, people taking to the streets, right, being violent, criminal damage.
I mean, it took 2 RAF planes being damaged for this proscription to take place. It wasn't the fact that Jewish businesses were being, badly attacked across London. It was the fact that they did target military infrastructure, which is understandable, but we were really hoping that, it isn't really a good sign from the government that they're really caring too much about the issue of anti-Semitism, which is, spiked several-fold in recent months. So yes, I mean, it was a good thing in some sense, although the timing of it you could be critical of.
So I just on the Palestine Action thing, before you then go on to why you were what you were doing in Trafalgar Square, I have to say I find myself being more critical of the government, and I think they're obfuscating. I don't think they have a coherent policy on terrorism, on domestic terrorism. CAA, for example, have been campaigning around the IRGC being proscribed.
Yeah.
And we know that the IRGC have committed a number of acts in this country, and they have. Nia Kobani was on the radio, on the GB News the other day, arguing that there are a number of refugees in this country who come from Iran who are actually IRGC supporters. Even though they're claiming refugee status, they're supposedly fleeing the IRGC, but when they get here, they wave the flag and,
Once upon a time, it was a common parlance. It was acknowledged by every liberal-minded person that, the IRGC were not something that, cohabitated with British values, that wasn't, a regular thing, something that can just be commonly supported.
Yeah.
And the Overton window has shifted so much in part of this tacit approval of extremists like Palestine Action that has allowed this to manifest in British society today. That if you, for 2 years, allow organizations to take over the streets and chant Intifada and chant, not even tacit support, actual genuine support for terrorist organizations, and the police do nothing, then the Overton window has completely and potentially irrevocably, whatever the right word is, been shifted so that this is now common parlance. And then to have someone stand up and say, do you know what, maybe this isn't so acceptable, is suddenly well, how can you do this? How can you hold such a view? And are we surprised? Yes, the government sat on the fence for 2 years. And
True, but then you could argue that they're actually trying to avoid the issue of the IRGC and Iran. And that's what I think is probably more. You're nodding. What would you think?
No, I completely agree with you. I think there's a real issue that terrorism hasn't been properly defined. I think that's an international issue as well. I don't think there's any international law which has defined what terrorism is. Is it? Even in Israel, what we consider terrorism is obviously the killing of soldiers. When a Palestinian, terrorist does go to an outpost or something and stabs 5 soldiers, that is considered a terrorist act in Israel. So there is some room for criticism of whatever definition of terrorism is. Is it targeting of civilians? What is it exactly targeting? Could it be sabotaging military infrastructure, public infrastructure? I would say I'm a little bit hesitant on the area of public infrastructure. I'd be skeptical to say that people, who are sabotaging the ULEZ cameras, I mean, are they a terrorist organization?
That's a good point.
I mean,
Yeah.
It gets tricky. The terrorist designation is actually the point that it does, in fact, get tricky, because at what point is it government overture to say that you're not allowed, that the civil disobedience, there is a long history of that, and which is exactly what they cite. The question is, where does it stop? Because they've clearly escalated from, protesting on the street to spray painting a few walls to then targeting Jewish businesses, to then targeting, weapons manufacturers that do business with this country, to then now escalating to an RAF base, which is, I think, where the government has they've seen, our existing laws aren't enough to mitigate this problem, and therefore now we have to, escalate ourselves.
I think that's true, but I think the thing that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but certainly the way I would feel is that if you would trust them more if they had proscribed the IRGC. So if they had now prescribed the IRGC and they had this clarity on what terrorism is, like you were just saying about what is the definition of terror, and then now they were moving on to Palestine Action, I think you'd say, well done, Lammy, you seem, or, Vet Cooper, you seem to have all of this under control, we trust you here. But that isn't what's happening. They're sort of, Israel strikes the Iranian nuclear program, and Lammy says, I've been on the phone to the foreign minister of Iran, having a nice chat with him, and America didn't tell us anything about what they would do. They've got no actual coherent approach here, and it seems like they're just going from one thing to another. I mean, the Kneecap. What do you think about the Kneecap Hezbollah flag waving?
Well, I think that's it's a clear breach of Section 13 of the Terrorism Act. I mean, it is a proscribed terrorist organization. I think the categorization of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization is correct. And I think if you're flying a flag, it's in support. It's certainly suggesting that you're supportive of the movement that you're. And I mean, Kneecap says it's almost in his own words. His outspoken support for extremist terrorist organizations. So I don't really have any query with the prescription of Hezbollah. I don't really have a query with the case against Kneecap currently. As to the IRGC, I'm in complete alignment with you. I think the government priority should have been the prescription of the IRGC as a terrorist organization. I mean, there has been attempts by the IRGC to target individuals in the country, and not simply just to harass them, but to violently attack them. To which point we can only know. We can't really know, but
if officials are to be believed, they foiled something like 20 attacks in recent months, right?
Attacks.
We're talking about like genuine intent of violence on British soil.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, they referred to that in Parliament. Dan Jarvis, is that the Security Minister? He referred to 20 attacks since 2022 that were aimed at killing people.
And I'm pretty sure it was a campaign promise for the last something like 4 or 5 governments that said they would proscribe the IRGC when it's politically expedient to do so. But then it comes to the challenging point of, we don't want to offend a tiny minority of our base who will have some sort of issue with that. And then I question the morality of your base, to be honest with you.
Okay, so that's Palestine Action. So you've now decided, you've heard about Palestine Action are going to be in Trafalgar Square on Monday. What was the next step? What led you?
Well, look. Initially, I had only turned up to observe what exactly was going on. I was watching probably the Palestine protest for about an hour and a half. I saw red triangles being upside down inverted red triangles being plastered all over the place, which to me sounds a little bit ludicrous, because that seems to me like a very concrete breach of the Terrorism Act. I mean, you're quite clearly supporting Hamas by doing something like that. I mean, these are things which are routinely used in Hamas propaganda videos, and is actually a tacit death threat, because they say that they're targeting this individual in the propaganda Hamas clips. So, I mean, they're clearly in support of this prescribed terrorist organization, and the police weren't doing anything in regard to that. It didn't appear to me. There were outbursts of violence before we did anything, and the police were arresting people for that. By the time a friend of mine had arrived, who's joining us behind this camera screen, who's trying to protect his identity.
I was going to say, I'm very happy to qualify, just so people understand. People have asked, so why is that person wearing a mask? Someone close to me, a family member in fact, was doxxed and then faced harassment, threats of violence, and it wasn't something I was willing. Although I'm very proud of what I stand for and what I say, and I stand by every single word, and my actions on that day, I'm just not willing to allow my family to face the consequences of my views. But please do not take that as an indication of the fact that I'm embarrassed of what I say. I'm not. I'm happy to represent those values. Unfortunately, we've devolved into a society whereby threats of intimidation and harassment have become somewhat commonplace, and it's not something I'm willing to expose the people around me to.
Yep.
And I'm happy to discuss my thought process of why people come and say, oh, you're a provocateur and you're just coming in to, cause trouble. I think we're losing sight a little bit of the agency of every person. Like I've seen this as a common commentary on what we did. And I do thank Isaac for being there and having my back and for filming it and etc. Is that it's become like an accepted practice, I suppose, that of course, if you wave a flag that the people disagree with you on, or you hold some principled stance that people disagree, then you can expect a violent reaction. And I think it kind of reflects the whole point of what we did on Monday, was that it shouldn't be a common expectation that, and it's something that, like I said to the police on the bus, I said, genuinely, the worst part of this is the fact that I have to make your life harder. Genuinely, we so appreciate the Metropolitan Police. And just because I understand your rationale that, at the end of the day, there's two people here and it's going to cause a ruckus and therefore we want to remove you, I understand that. That doesn't make it just. It doesn't make it right. Mob rule, at least for now, is not the rule of the land. And it shouldn't be. And I should be free the same way their rights are protected, whereby the police are allowing them to call for jihad and they're allowing them to call for intifada, which is genuinely, it's calling for pogrom in a different language, in a different iteration of anti-Semitism. The Metropolitan Police wouldn't allow for people to call for pogrom, but yet switch it to Arabic and somehow it's become acceptable and permissible. And I think we're taking away the agency from the people who are protesting. They're saying freedom of speech, we should be allowed to have our say. So I concur, and as should I. And therefore, yes, the police say, should I arrest 500 of them if they're breaking the law, as Isaac so put it on the day of? Absolutely. If there are 500 people violating the peace and causing violent reactions. Sorry, yeah, please.
No, it's okay. So the interesting thing, though, is that you say free speech, but the interesting thing is that you guys, all you were trying to do was show a flag. So it's kind of interesting, because I thought about this a lot afterwards, because as I was explaining to you earlier, our intervention, so for anybody who hasn't seen it, our intervention was we were actually holding a banner that said there is no genocide in Gaza. Now, for us, you could argue that we needed free speech because we're trying to make a statement. We're trying to make a political, we're arguing a political point. You guys were simply trying to hold a flag. So that's kind of interesting that it should be more foundational. As you rightly say, it shouldn't be even the question of mob rule, obviously should come into it, but it should even be more foundational. It should be literally you were standing holding a flag. That,
to be fair, I did say proscribe the IRGC and rape is not resistance.
Well, and you sang Rule Britannia, which was the other ironic. Because,
no one showed that anywhere.
Oh, I saw it in the video.
That was what incited the riot.
It's very provocative to sing, a song about Britain. To be proud of Britain. It's very provocative. But I mean, to pick up on that point of saying that we were provocateurs. I find it almost, I mean, this might be a reduction to absurdity, but I find the rhetoric to be almost akin to the woman who's raped and the officer tells them, well, you were dressed provocatively, you were asking for trouble. I mean, we weren't asking to be assaulted, we weren't asking for our flag to be stolen. We used to live in a country where we could disagree agreeably, and that included quite, that included things or opinions that we didn't like, and we vehemently disagreed with. And that expectation seems to be incumbent upon our movement, as whether you're a conservative or pro-Israel, or anything which isn't part of this pro-Palestinian mob or isn't associated with it. But it's a double standard that seems to exist tacitly in public life, that we aren't really, we're held to a very different standard than they are.
There's a reasonable expectation of civility from the pro-Israel side, I think is the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look, we do have that as a core emphasis within our message, that we are peaceful, we are law-abiding. But that's now become, it seems to be a disadvantage rather than advantageous. The police seem to think that's a weakness. They're very happy for you and I to be threatened with public order offences. But when we said that we were assaulted, when we said that our flag was was ripped from our hands,
which they watched at the time.
I mean, 20 officers were just watching as these crimes were being committed against us. And they said, no, how could you expect us to enforce the law? This mob is so violent. We couldn't possibly. And I mean, that seems to be the double standard. They're very happy to police the meek, but they will never police those that are violent. And that is two-tier policing.
So would you say that your presence there, you were trying to expose that? Or had you not thought that far through? Were you expecting that response, do you think?
I think it was an expectation. I think it is, after 2 years, it's become an expectation of violence there. And, I mean, if you want to say that's stupid, okay, very well. We were expecting to be attacked. But it shouldn't become an expectation.
No.
It shouldn't have become an expectation. Britain used to be very different. It never used to be this way. And I think we should strive for a country where violent criminals aren't allowed to have allowed free reign on the streets of London.
I was going to say, it kind of becomes, like, at least from my perspective, and I think Isaac may share this, that it becomes a win-win. Either that, yes, because it is provocative. Making a political point, by definition, is somewhat provocative. Otherwise, you wouldn't be making any sort of point, right? The people talk about standing 500 yards away. We weren't actually standing in the middle of any sort of crowd and looking for that. But the reality is that if people were to get violent, it exposes that movement for what it really does stand for. Dress it up in nice language of, following the footsteps of the suffragettes. But it's not the reality of that movement, is that they are willing to shut it down. Or on the other hand, the police would react in a way that we thought they might, which would be to stop us, and thereby, like, it's a tacit admissal that, yes, certain viewpoints are protected differently in the UK. Because I can almost guarantee you, if I were to have been flying the Union Jack, suddenly the batons would have come out, and the far right thugs, in inverted commas, I know you can't see me, would have been taken away, right? Because that's the greatest threat to English democracy, right? I don't know if you read any of the newspapers, but far right thugs is what we all have to be scared of.
So you mean if you'd had a Union Jack, you would have been whisked away more quickly, you mean?
Absolutely. I think the police were in, and again, I genuinely do sympathise with the Metropolitan Police, because we put them in a difficult position of, we do have the freedom of speech, but yet it will incite the crowd, and these people are known to have been violent. But again, if you are so concerned with the history of violence of a certain organisation, why are they on the streets? Why are they taking over London?
Yeah, you're quite right. So there's an interesting thing here, which is that they maintain that it's all about public order. So they maintain that their job is all about keeping the peace. Yeah, and they did I don't know if you saw it, an interesting tweet the other day. They tweeted a picture, must have been from a drone. There was a picture of the Stop the Hate counter protest by the side of the march. So the march was going through on Saturday, and they were Stop the Hate with the flags. And the police were, their tweet was along the lines of, we've done a great job keeping everybody apart. Our job is to keep opposing views apart. And it's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? Because you look at what Mark Rowley said about what you guys, you've obviously reached heights of infamy here.
Us far right hooligans,
yeah,
football
but he was
hooligans.
talking about you on LBC, as you know, and he was just saying that it was akin to football fans.
Yes.
And again, you see that what the police are effectively doing is, what he's doing in that situation is he's saying it doesn't matter what the views are, it's about public order. It doesn't matter, Arsenal, Spurs, who cares, it doesn't matter. But back to your point earlier, what he's effectively saying is that the views of people who are supporting Palestine Action and supporting vandalism and supporting, running people off the streets are the same as a bunch of nice, well-behaved Jews with an Israeli flag. He's equating the two effectively by saying that it's Arsenal and Spurs.
Even worse, I thought that was a bit of a dog whistle kind of thing, that he's trying to imply some form of far right extremism, paint with that brush, because it's much easier to dismiss, right? If you say, oh yeah, you have a couple of guys just looking for trouble.
Wait, can you get your shoulders off the... Because it's shaking.
Oh, sorry.
I was just thinking, in the interests of the camera footage.
I think it's a lot easier to dismiss based on our own preconceived notions of what a person is standing for. Oh, these are two people looking for trouble, as opposed to two people who are so concerned about the state of our society that, yes, are willing to risk physical harm to make this point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think one thing to say is that you've caught their attention. Between us all. And so what do we do next, do you think? What's the next, because the fact that Rowley feels obliged to respond to this, we're finding with the protest that we did outside Kneecap in Westminster Court the other week, we ended up talking to the police at the end because the police tried to drag us away twice and we refused to move. And then at the very end of it, the point that I was making to the police was, and made the same point on Monday as well, is that, look, you do realise that if you drag us away, then there is no other voice. Whether you agree with us or not, what you've effectively done is said outside Westminster Court today, the only point of view that will be heard is these 500 Kneecap supporting agitators, and the same thing would have happened on Monday. You guys haven't been there, if we hadn't been there, if the police succeeded in driving us away at the behest of Palestine Action, there would have been no other voice. And so I think that's something we've got to take seriously.
And again, has become our reality, that mob rule is the rule of the roost. That if you have 500, because what they are saying, they're saying if you have any sort of political point to make sure you show up with 500 heavies who are ready to do criminal damage, who are ready to harass and intimidate and get violent.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that then the police have to take you seriously, because at that point, but again, you're asking a community who have no interest in fighting with the police officers, who would like to follow the law and what we're told and given directions. And unfortunately, I genuinely feel like the police officers in question are being let down by people higher up than themselves, who are being told we have to sit on the fence, we have to let people do what they do. What will cause the most mayhem is 500 people getting violent with the police. Right? The police officers described to us how they'd been kicked and pushed and punched. And so I do understand that I have genuine sympathy for the police officer on the street who's having to go through that because their superiors are directing them in a way that just isn't just or right and places them in danger. Instead of opposing these people being out on the streets and being allowed to run riot.
It feels like the policy is might is right. Since this mob is particularly violent, because this crowd of people is particularly large, because they're particularly unrowdy, they aren't. The laws of this country aren't applicable in the same way they are to the rest of us. And Mark Rowley said that's not two-tier justice, but I think on just prima facie, on the very surface of things, how can it not be? How can it not be?
And honestly, the police response, I now understand when people talk about, and I know he gets a lot of flack and I don't want to have any sort of tacit official approval, but when certain marches in the UK happen, or let's talk about a football match even, you have police officers equipped to deal if the situation were to get out of hand. Whereas yesterday, that didn't seem to be the approach that the police took. Are they so worried about inciting a specific demographic of people that they're not equipped to deal with the outcomes of those actions? And if that's not two-tier policing, what is? If a police officer is coming expecting violence or what have you, it's almost the police inciting a certain demographic of people to say, hold on a second, you claim that there's no two-tier justice system, you claim that there's no, feet on the ground who are acting in any kind of different way, yet when you go to World War II memorial service, you have police officers there. We're not even talking about a football match, right, where, people are drinking and getting rowdy. You have police officers there who are clearly, again, as you said, on the face of it, they're clearly equipped to deal with certain kinds of problems. And yesterday, we saw no sign of that. It's kind of like kid gloves.
Yeah. Any final words? Are you going to be back out on the streets anytime soon?
I think we have to be. I mean, if we're going to protect our rights, and if we do really have this might is right rule, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really be out there. To really, it is our fight. I mean, it's not just the Jewish community, it's the British community. It's all those who want to have a civilised Britain. Because the policing isn't good enough in this country. I mean, I can't think of an institution in this country that is operating the way it should be, and the way it has been.
It's a pretty damning indictment, particularly from somebody so young, and it shames me and embarrasses me that you're coming to that conclusion, but I think you're right.
But
okay, brilliant.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
the venue to be able to express this.
Thank you, our fight, and thank you, viewers.
And it's literally our fight, like people like you, and we really do appreciate it. Like standing up for what is just because it is just, is a rarity, unfortunately. And if more people don't accept that this is in fact our communal fight, then unfortunately mob rule will be the rule of the roost, and that's our new reality. Unless people like you stand up to it. So thank you very much.
Like you guys, I'm amazed. I was so pleased to see you on Monday. And I don't know if you saw. Sorry, we're about to finish, and we're going to say one last thing. But I don't know if you saw there was another guy who popped up with an Israeli flag.
I did.
So we'll track him down at some point, and we'll maybe do an interview with him.
Can I just give one shout out? Because randomly I was walking in town and I saw there was some sort of protest going on. There were two Romanian fellows who had pulled out, I have no idea where they got them from or why, what have you. They pulled out two Israeli flags and they said, like, because, we obviously went to have a look and what have you. And they were like, yeah, we love Israel. We can't stand what's happening. We love this country. And like, it is
Romanian.
slowly for Romanian. It was so interesting.
Romania loves Jews.
Well,
But like as a flashpoint to go against the two men to just make a stand for a country that they've never been to, for people just because it's right and they stand against, these kind of things happening every single week is incredible. People are waking up.
I think so. I think it's the big challenge for us now is how we find those people.
Absolutely.
Give them a focal point, something to gravitate.
It shouldn't take violence to be the focal point for people to stand up for what is right.
Brilliant.
Amazing. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.